Black Lives Matter, the organisation behind many of these race protests, it actually has an extreme agenda. It's against capitalist societies, against really the West. Now, one of its co-founders, Patrisse Cullors, has been very frank about being a Marxist.
We actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories.
Oh, trained Marxists, you heard it yourself. Meanwhile, Western countries have also been under assault from another hostile ideology, militant Islam, Islamism. On Saturday, in a park in Reading, near London, hours after a Black Lives Matter protest in that very same park, a Libyan man who came to Britain as a refugee stabbed 5 people, killed 3 of them, including a young history teacher. Now, police first denied this was a terrorist attack and then admitted it was. The killer had been on a terrorism watch list. Joining me from London is Brendan ONeill, editor of Spiked Online and the sharpest political commentator in Britain. Brendan, thanks for joining us again. What do we know about this terrorist?
Well, we know a few things. As you say, we know that he is from Libya. We know that he's here in the UK as a refugee. We know that he's been in trouble with the law before. He seems to have had a short prison sentence for a fairly minor crime. And he was being watched, so far as we can tell, by counter-terrorism police, presumably because he was suspected of being up to no good. So those are the things we know for sure about the man who carried out this barbaric attack. There's something else we know for sure too, which is that this Islamist attack will be quickly forgotten, because that's always what happens in this country, whether it was the Manchester Arena suicide bombing or the London Bridge mass stabbing or the stabbing in Reading now. Every single time this happens, we are told, don't look back in anger, don't talk about it too much, don't focus on it, just lay a flower, shed a tear and move on with your life. And anyone who asks awkward questions about why these attacks keep happening is denounced as Islamophobic. So one thing we can be certain of is that there will not be sufficient interrogation and discussion of why these things keep happening in the UK.
Well, Brendan, on that very point, look, maybe I'm just being far too cynical and sceptical, but police and politicians, and politicians on both sides, asked the media and people on social media not to pass on video of the stabbings. Now, I don't know, they didn't want to distress the relatives or something, I don't know, but nobody asked people not to spread video of George Floyd being killed. That was the video, of course, that triggered all those race protests. Why not share that video and show people the reality of what happened?
Yeah, you know, the videos from Reading Park are distressing. I was sent some, and they're doing the rounds, and they're horrific. They are really horrible to look at. They remind me of the videos that came out after the Nice truck attack when a man killed, I think, more than 80 people with a lorry in Nice, and there was lots of horrific video from that too. So they are horrible, but you're right, there is an extraordinary double standard here. I mean, the George Floyd killing, which shocked all of us, an absolutely horrendous event, that has been front and centre in the news in the UK for the past 2 weeks in relation to the Black Lives Matter protests that have taken place. But the killing of these 3 people in a park, we know that one of them was a school teacher, 36 years old. We know that another one was an American citizen who worked for a pharmaceutical company. You know, good people, decent people, British citizens or American citizens sitting in a park on a sunny day. I'm afraid that their killings are not going to get the same attention. They're not going to get the same focus because people don't want to talk about the social tensions and the religious tensions that lie behind acts of violence like this. So there's an extraordinary double standard where George Floyd is talked about in the UK, even though his awful killing happened 4,000 miles away. But the people who die as a result of attacks like this tend to be quickly forgotten. I think that's a real shame.
Yes, I can't help but wonder, you know, repeated viewings. We couldn't see the George Floyd video enough to be horrified and whipped into rage, but this one we can't see at all, which is most extraordinary. Police also said there was no link between the Black Lives Matter protests in the park and the terrorist attack soon after. Now, in the policing sense, Brendan, I'm not saying there's a link. I'm quite ready to believe there's no link at all. But in other ways, I do think there's a link. There is a link, I believe, between whipping up hostility to the West, etc., and someone who acts on hostility to the West, etc. I can't get across the fact of this coincidence.
I agree with you, and we have to face up to the fact that in the UK over the past week or two, we have been told constantly that Britain is a disgusting racist country, that we have racist statues all over the place, that we have a racist history, a horrible history, that every single white person is complicit in racism, which is equivalent of saying they are complicit in evil, whether they recognise it or not. That is the message we've been getting from the media class, from sections of the political class, and of course from the Black Lives Matter movement. And then, lo and behold, after all these this continual discussion, a man walks into a park and stabs 3 people to death, 2 of whom we know were white men. We don't know about the 3rd victim yet. So there is, I think, some kind of link here, because we live in a culture in which the left and certain sections of the small L liberal elite constantly stir up racial tension, the politics of identity, the culture of grievance. They send the message that Britain is a foul, racist country, and that is going to whip up certain forms of violence and certain forms of tension, and increasingly Islamist violence and Islamist tension. I think they're playing a dangerous game. Someone needs to put a stop to this culture of racial grievance and get back to the idea of social solidarity, national solidarity, and people feeling united rather than divided.
I agree. You can't have one ideology dehumanising, in this case, white Britons, and another ideology not picking up some cues from that. Britain is finally opening up after the big virus shutdown over there, Brendan. You've had deaths, meanwhile, fall from more than 1,000 a day to just over 100 over the last week, 100 a day last week. How's this playing politically?
It's playing in an interesting way because the government has made mistakes. There is no question about that, particularly, I think, in relation to care homes. I think there will have to be an inquiry into why so many people died in care homes and how the disease was allowed to get into care homes. And the way in which elderly people died, I think, is quite shocking. So questions will have to be answered. But support for the government remains generally high. People still think that Boris, the general public tends to think that Boris is doing a good job and is doing the best that he can. The left and the Labour Party in particular are trying as much as possible to weaponise the COVID crisis in order to wound the government, but it's not really working. So the political atmosphere is incredibly interesting. I think lots of people feel that some mistakes were made and lots of people feel that some good things were done too in relation to COVID-19, but it hasn't had the huge impact on the Tory government that some people were expecting. So I think we'll have to wait and see how it plays out in the longer term.